encouraging experience, then we can even make it shorter. But let's see. Maybe it's.
Let's see how it goes. Yeah, because
see.
this week is going to be a bit dense for you as well, because you will we'll continue on Wednesday. Yeah. Anyway, just a reminder about administration and everything. Remember, be active towards your pair. When you get your pair, be active as soon as possible, especially if you know that for this some whatever reason you cannot do the exercise this week. So don't leave the other person hanging. Just let to know that get in touch with the pair and get in touch with the pair, especially if you know that you have schedule problems or something else. But as always, don't panic, don't stress too much about these assignments. The deadlines are very flexible, and at the end of the day, we will just check whether you have done it or not. The actual hugely big deadline is somewhere around June 10th or something like that, because if you miss that deadline, then we're gone. It's, yeah. And as for this course, we are now almost halfway there. We are today talking about lean agile design and shared meanings. That is the topic. And we have Wednesday, the day after tomorrow, Jari is going to go and take a deep dive into facilitation a little bit more. And then we got 2 more weeks left, and it is June soon. So why not? So anyway, that's where we are at the moment. So let's get to exercise 2, which most of you had returned. Last week, somebody, probably one of the tourists who were not making the exercises, was kind of like, could you please remind us what was the exercise? So the exercise number 2 was this, what we called a temporal onion, which meant that in the exercise, you would take a project, describe it to your pair, and then the pair would start asking questions such as, what had happened, what should have happened before the project, what's the information you would have liked to know or need to know before the project, and then perhaps more importantly, helping and sparring questions about the future of the project. What's the desired impact? Once the project has finished and time has passed, something like 6 months, what is impact? Kind of going into the future where the project itself has been done and dusted, but the impact might actually take quite a long while. So really the point of the exercise was focusing on what are the desired impacts of the project, rather than maybe traditionally, what are the outcomes of the project. And again, I picked one. This was a really good version of it. This was Venia G. Palmros. Nice work, nice work. So just to give that, there was a lot of good answers here, good reflections on it, and some of them were really good, just like this one. So if you are there, you can tap yourself on the back. Well done. But actually, what did you answer then? Oops, why do my slides look different? Okay, we don't care too much about that. One of you said, kind of looking and reflecting this exercise and this tool, what was the benefits of it? One of you wrote, it forces you to think of the impacts after the project, a justification why the project is needed and where and whom does it impact. Yes, exactly. Well put. That's what we were hoping for. And then some of you said, well, actually works as a nice framework to help to visualize the project based on the impacts rather than the activities or the events. So of course, traditional project planning, and there's nothing wrong with this, is kind of like, what are the actions? What should people do at what stages? And you probably still need that in a project. But this exercise actually puts the focus much more on the impacts, kind of in addition, maybe to complement the traditional one. Clearly stating the desired outcome acts as a strong motivator and provides a shared direction for the team. The word motivation popped up a couple of times, quite a lot in your comments about the reflection, that this actually helps people to motivate, and this has a connection to motivating people, which kind of makes sense. People are interested in what's the actual impact of what they are doing and why. The one of you wrote, the context is tricky. So kind of the context of the project, and they continue to kind of like, what point of view should they be taken? So we're taking this easy and simple exercise, whose point of view, what point of view to take? And like they wrote nicely, this shapes the whole discussion. So for example, we talked very little about people, even though they are a key part of any change. Excellent point, excellent learnings, and that's why it is actually here. So it also, you could say that it made you nicely conscious and mindful that there are, just like we've been talking, different perspective, different context. So which lens, which context are you choosing? And now it became a topic for discussion. Excellent. And another comment, many change projects fail to achieve the targeted impact. So it's important to identify what the impact actually is. That's it. As simply said, simply put, yeah. What is the actual impact of the project? We focus so much on the outcomes of the project, the outputs of the projects, rather than kind of looking further at, okay, once this project is in the history, what's the impact of it? What's the larger context that it fits in? Then a couple of other comments. There was a lot of comments, so I picked a lot of them here. This once again proves that having a sparring partner is beneficial. When things have to be said out loud, they become clearer. So this slide is very much about the fact that you are becoming more and more conscious about the role of facilitation in these exercises, which is kind of, giving the torch to Jari and Wednesday already, that, these things start popping up now in your reflections. Articulating our thoughts and perspectives to each other compelled us to reflect more deeply than we would have if the task had been done individually. So if the first point was that, hey, talking aloud helps, makes it better, doing it in a pair makes it deeper as well. So now you can see, it's basic stuff. Using the tool through discussion is easier than writing it down. It also makes it easier to ask follow-up questions. Yes, absolutely. The power of conversation, the power of dialogue. And maybe, I don't know, it's not in this comment, but also it kind of gives you a bit of a freedom. If you're not asked to write things down, there's perhaps more freedom to go on tangents and maybe have, conversations about something. But, writing things down is perhaps typically thought to be more formal. I think I have one more. Yes, I do have one more. This was very interesting, so thank you for the comment. To be interviewed was a bit painful at the beginning, made me a bit nervous. It forced me to think differently, clarify, argument, and change perspectives. The process challenges more than if one would only think alone. Thank you for that comment. That's really well put. And apologies for all the pain that we have caused you, but you pretty much also said that the pain was for the better, wasn't it? So, but also kind of seriously being that, hey, people are not necessarily used to having these kind of conversations. So it might feel a little bit uncomfortable, but it is very beneficial, as you can see. Go ahead, Jari.
Yeah. I mean, this is really great experiences showing how social our thinking is and how different is it when somebody's really asking and listening, and using this kind of frames to really elaborate or contextualize is the point. But then this speaking aloud your thoughts is the point, and you need the ears who are willing to listen. I think that's very, very core, and we will talk about that much more on Wednesday.
Yeah. And I think one of the things about these exercises is that the person listening to you is they're there to help you. So kind of the setup is that the other person is there to help you.
Yes.
Because you could have a similar setup where the other person is interrogating you. So it could be like like trying to, why aren't you doing this? Give me answers. And so you can see that the whole setup really actually matters, that this is facilitation. This is helping the other person and not like interrogating you to give the right answers.
Yes. And I think this word helping is here the key word. And when we try to be in help, so it's quite different relationality there.
Anyway, I think I've had this slide already a couple of years because one participant way back wrote that this is really nicely. This is pretty much the point of the exercise. It reminds me on how golf professionals play. They think from where they want to hit the last stroke and where they need to be one stroke earlier, etc., until you know where you need to aim your first shot. It's pretty much the point of the exercise. You want the desired impact in the long term, somewhere in the future, and then just like this golf metaphor, you go one by one back, and then you know, okay, this is the next thing I need to do to eventually get somewhere there that I want to get. And the other point being is this picture trying to show that, again, the same thing with the context only, and the impact happens outside the project. And now it's not just the contextually outside, but it's kind of in a time dimension outside. The project, kind of this simple thinking that when the project has been done and dusted, nothing much has happened yet. The impact kind of starts happening afterwards. And kind of making a focus, it's not really inside of the project that the impact happens. It always happens outside. And only then you can see with these two exercises combined, which actually many of you said that they should be combined, they can start seeing the larger context. You maybe start surfacing some underlying motivations and broader goals and kind of like, okay, now I understand the big picture literally. So really kind of to summarize this, that the point of the exercise, and which is the segue for to this week's thinking, is that you need to clarify the desired impact, not the outputs of what happens once the, what are the outputs of the project? They are important, but kind of you need to think one step bigger, one step further. Not just the actions of the project, but kind of the impact. So for example, what's the difference between if somebody would say that, after a year, the design impact of that website is updatable so that the new content can be applied. So the impact would be that the website is updatable. This would be like a technical project. But then the sparring question would be like, okay, but what's the actual desired impact of having an updatable website? Why do you need an updatable website? Are you looking beyond the website about the impacts and the role and the reason of this project? Another example, somebody could say that the goals of this project are that we collect lessons learned and we collect feedback and document what has happened. Great. But are these the desired impacts of the project? So is your project's desired impact to collect feedback from the project? It's probably not. There's a reason for collecting the feedback. Once you have collected the feedback, it probably enables something. It creates opportunities to do something else. And that's probably the desired impact. And many of you, like I said, started to think about what if we combine these two tools. So the context onion, which is really about an easy facilitation tool about clarifying the organizational context. And then last week, this kind of desired impact tool, the desired impact for change. And by now, because I already started spotting from your answers that you're actually becoming more conscious and mindful about the facilitation part, you probably are starting to notice that these are facilitation tools for you and others to spot the issues, problems, and challenges. So what I mean by here is that these are not tools to do project planning, for example. These are not tools to describe your organization problems and options, problems and issues. So that's why we have been focusing on the discussions you're having with the pairs and having like, that's very interesting. So does it mean that, running this project actually will hit these and these kind of problems? So another way of putting is that by now, can you spot the difference when you have done these tools, have used these tools in pair work? Can you spot the difference between facilitating an answer from somebody and coming up with an answer? So those are two different things. So let's say that coming up with an answer is that, okay, what is the desired impact of this project? And you would say, well, it's to increase sales. That's coming up with an answer. Now that's a bit different from facilitating somebody to give a good quality answer. Now you're actually more focused on how is that answer coming? What was difficult about giving that answer? What was easy about giving that answer? Whose perspective was that answer? It's not actually the answer as such that becomes important. And I think there's a huge difference once you can spot these two things. Facilitating an answer for somebody and then coming up with an answer. Yes. And now actually this brings us to exercise number 3 for this week. And I'm going to introduce it now. So if we have 2 of these already coming up, the third one is a very dumb exercise. There's a lot of puns intended in this lecture. So dumb is probably many of you know. If you know, you can, make a note of it in the chat. But dumb is an acronym for having a really good goal, an objective. So a really good objective should be dumb, meaning that it's doable, it's understandable, it's measurable, and it's beneficial. And that's kind of another extremely simple framework. And having said that, it's probably very difficult to achieve. It's actually not that easy, and I'm going to come back to that, to achieve really good, clear goals, but it's always worth pursuing. It's always good to have a conversation. How could this objective of ours be more doable, understandable, measurable, beneficial? There are, of course, many goals. Some of you might be familiar with SMART goals, which comes from having good objectives and goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. Yes, you can use that as well, but in this course, we're going to be dumb because it makes these jokes a little bit more funnier, I hope. But actually, the lesson we want to bring with this is that we all understand that goals are important. Whether it's a project, whether it's, changing an organization, whatever you're doing, we understand that you should have goals because the goals give you clarity, they give you focus in a group and so forth. And we all understand that communication is important. We need to talk with other people and make sure we have learned their perspectives, they understand our perspectives. So we also understand that communicating goals is important. So it's not enough just to give people goals, but we should have maybe a dialogue and communication. Do you understand this? Do you understand what I mean by this? Is this a good goal? Is this a measurable goal? But this is actually very difficult. So let's viewpoints why I believe that these are difficult. Because I think we are still, most of the goals in work life and probably personal life are a bit ambiguous, meaning that it's not quite clear whether you have achieved the goal or not. So here I have listed 4 imaginary goals. Maybe a project has a goal, more productive work, or IT skills and legal understanding improved among the workforce. Yeah, this could be a goal for a project or initiative. Or we could have a goal that UX, it should drive the impact in our company. Or maybe we want to create an open communication culture. And now, as you probably guessed, these are very ambiguous, actually, when you start thinking about it, because you could be asking for the first one, where for whom? Who are you talking about? And what do you actually mean by productive here? For the second one, you could start asking, is one person enough? Is it enough that we just educate one person? Because then, in theory, the workforce is more, improved in understanding. UX drive the impact. What does it actually mean? What is the actual desired impact? Or the last one, which people typically agree and nod their heads, yes, more open with communication culture, but it's actually a bit ambiguous. Are we closed at the moment? What needs to actually change here? So part of the dumb goals is, of course, the very simple thing that is something or is it not? And here, just to give you an example of what could be a good unambiguous goal, would be something like this: 200 new customers by June. This is unambiguous in a sense that when comes June, you either have them or you don't. Funding proposal is accepted. That's a good goal because it is either accepted or it is not. I have submitted my thesis. You either have submitted or not. Or maybe you do. Canvas in use in 7 of our teams in this organization. Well, you can go and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm sure you get the point. So kind of the point being that you need to clarify the goals, make them as measurable as possible. Sometimes we're going to come back to that. It's not easy. But somehow I think, and this is my point, and you can disagree with me, but I'm saying that a lot of organizations, and especially when it comes to change, we seldom clarify the goals. We maybe have big abstract goals, but actually I try to list here typical answers why people avoid making their goals clear and understandable. First of all, it's complex and it's difficult. Well, sure it is. Should that stop you? Maybe somebody will say, that's our boss's job. They should do this. Yeah, kind of, they're probably responsible in it, but still, it's you who need to achieve those goals. Too many stakeholders, you can't put a number on it. Well, it doesn't mean that the goal cannot be clear if you can't quantify it. We will know when we see it. This is a typical thing that we're doing something innovative or creative, it's impossible to set the target. Well, I don't fully agree. it could be that you do not know what you are creating, but I think you should have a vision of what's the desired impact. What are you looking for? What are you aiming at? Otherwise, you're just, poking around in the dark. But point being that why do we seldom clarify the goals? I think that we think that it's easy. And, think about yourself as well. Clarifying the goals of your project, of your studies, of, something. We kind of think that, well, it's easy. I just write these things down. But actually, in reality, it is not easy. Clarifying goals is not easy. And because here's a bunch of facilitative sparring questions, or somebody could say that these are stupid questions or dumb questions. So for any goals, and now you can see where we're aiming at with exercise 3, is just you can start by facilitating. How do you know you have been successful? Somebody gives you, these are project goals. Great. How do you know whether you have achieved them or not? Or the one from exercise 2, okay, great. If you reach those goals, what will happen in the 6 months from now? How will you know whether that's happened? How will you know if that has not happened? That's a tricky question. How do you know if this goal has not been achieved? And when people give, say that, hey, we need to educate the workforce, like my example. Well, you can start asking silly questions like, is it enough that we have one? How many needs to be educated? Maybe you can give me a percentage. And then, of course, how would reaching this goal be beneficial in the larger context, organizational context? And then just how do you measure that? How do you know whether that goal has been reached or not? And here you can see playing dumb, facilitation and leadership is actually very much about asking dumb questions. Because if I go back to the previous slide, you can see you don't have to be an expert to ask these questions. You don't have to understand about the domain the other person is working to ask these questions. You can just ask these questions pretty much and ask the other person to clarify. And this is going to be the exercise number 3. And I'm kind of hoping, I'm pretty sure you can see the benefits of these dumb questions that you can start asking. Good. Let me give you an example. So, playing dumb with champagne. I have actually done this once. Happy coincidence. There's a party coming. I went today and bought a lot of sparkling wine. Now I have a prop here to explain this exercise. It's not actually champagne. It is an Italian sparkling wine, but nevertheless. So the point being with this exercise or mind thinking game, let's say that you're the boss of the team and you tell that, hey, you tell the team I bought this bottle of very expensive champagne and we can drink this if we have been successful within a month. So after 30 days, if we have been successful, let's drink this champagne. Yeah, everybody's happy. And now the question becomes, what should we be write the criteria? On the refrigerator, where we put the champagne, there should be a note saying that you can drink this champagne if. Now, what is the criteria? What's the measurable thing that it says that we are happy with our work after 1 month? And then you can start having a discussion, and then you can start asking, well, is that doable? Can we actually achieve that thing? Does everybody now understand what it says here on the fridge? And the point of the exercise, this kind of thinking game or exercise is, of course, that you can create these criteria yourself within the team. Yes, you can probably have like goals coming from the outside and objectives and all of this, but you can still start having this mindset and thinking that, hey, what do we think as a team would be the criteria for popping up that champagne in 1 month? And having this conversation and having it asking questions, is that achievable? How do we measure that? How will this benefit the other goals, the big goals? Those conversations are just solid gold of has everybody understood these things? How do we connect 1 month to the whole big project and all of these things? Like I said, I've done this. It actually works quite well. Everybody's happy, and suddenly you're having these extremely productive conversations about what should we do for the next month. So if we put all these exercises together, 1, 2, and 3, you can see that, hey, we actually have a bunch of tools. exercises to clarify the context, the time context, and the success criteria. And yeah, this is pretty much leadership. This is mentoring. This is coaching. This is facilitation. You can just go pretty much to any person and go like, explain me the context. Oh, interesting. But what are you really trying to achieve? What's the desired impact? Interesting. I can see that you have, difficulties explaining this. And then you bring the third exercise. Well, how do you know whether you have achieved it? That's your desired impact, but how do you know that it was achieved or wasn't? So yes, leadership, facilitation, in a sense, just becomes this one continuous goal clarification exercise. I could say that, contemporary leadership is all about helping others to clarify the goals. So let's say, you have a huge organization culture transformation. So you have the very ambiguous objectives. First, you throw in the onion, and then you clarify the context. And then you get contextual objectives. Then you take the temporal onion, and now you actually have impactful objectives. And now you take the champagne dumb exercise, and now you have made those objectives DUMB. So in a way, and you can probably see that in a way, it's just like that. That's what leadership is all about. And you don't really have to. It helps if you understand the domain. It helps if you have the experience. But this kind of brings the whole thing that you do not have to be the expert here. You just need to play dumb. Ask other people to clarify. Of course, as a leader, probably your role is to ask and talk to different people and bring this all together. And here you can kind of see that this is where the facilitation happens. Asking people, listening to people, drawing these pictures and asking more questions, listening even more. This is what facilitation is about. Asking, listening, drawing. And yeah, it pretty much works on any project. Try it at home, or even better, try it at work. And see how it goes. These, after the third exercise, you have these 3 extremely simple tools that are not, they're not challenging anything in your corporation or organization, but you can just take them out of your back pocket and start having these conversations over a cup of coffee or maybe a cup of whatever you're drinking at work. But why do I think this clarification is so very important now? Why I think this is much, much more than a gimmick. And I think this brings us back to AI and everything that's happening as we speak. The whole automation of knowledge work. Because more and more things are automated. There's more and more levels of abstraction that people need to handle. Which level of abstraction is relevant at which moment? This complexity, there's been more and more. If the machines are going to be automating stuff, there's even more and more complexity to handle. And there's probably going to be even more and more diverse teams because we need people with different backgrounds and expertise. So somebody needs to facilitate their goals and focus points. And the last point being that somebody needs to put these things into context. Just like the comment from the previous exercise. What is the relevant context for this exercise? Absolutely. What's the relevant context or lens for this project, for this meeting, for this decision? So kind of a mid-summary, we need more and more of these summaries, these syntheses, these groupings, and shared works, shared frameworks, checklists, templates. Because ultimately, we want to have really well-grounded, inclusive, and good and clear decision-making. And once we have done, kind of putting it plain, once you have gone through these 3 things, context, impact, clear goals, you are much more ready to start making good quality decisions. Good. That was end of part lecture 1. Now I need to check the time. Okay, let's move on. Unless there are any comments, that was my breaker here. Okay, where are we in this course? So kind of a mid-review. So here's where we are. You've got to make an organization responsive to remain competitive. That was already in lecture 1. We have this focus uncertainty. We have different lenses. There's no single truth. And we believe that change is done by doing and behavior. And the other thing we got already by this far in this course is what we got. We got a vision, we need a new culture, we need a change program, maybe the 6 foundation stones from last lecture. And we need to understand the context maybe better. We need to discuss about the impact. And now you're soon going to be using these measurable goals as well. So remember this, uncertainty, can't plan it, must build this culture. Culture is about tools. Tools are lean, agile, and design. So this was my point from the lecture, was it last time? I think it was last time or the previous one. But why have this design thinking? Why have agile methodologies? Why have lean startup become so very popular? And the reason is pretty much because these give tools and frameworks to clarify and simplify people about, and these are agnostic about the content. So these, if you remember from lecture 1, pretty much that these tools, design, lean, and agile, have been seen as the medicine for uncertainty. And this kind of thinking that I already said, that from the uncertainty to get the competitive advantage, the narrative and the thinking, or you could even say the philosophy goes, that you actually go into the tools, the factory floor, you bring the weeklies, you bring the, specific templates, you give these, frameworks for decision making, like I just talked about, and this will bring, collective behavior, collective thinking, and then we get the shared culture. The kind of question could be, okay, which do I choose? Which one do I start? Should I start by design thinking or agile methodology or lean startup thinking and so forth? And they are all I'm not going to go too much. I don't have the time to go into these, but they have all their historical backgrounds. Agile has what's history in software engineering. Lean thinking is even older. It really is the product of the Japanese Toyota thinking way back in 1970s and 80s, and has been used very much in industry and in logistics as well. And you can see some of these just quick slides here just showing it has these same kind of values in it of learning organizations, of reflection, going back. 6 Sigma Lean is very famous, or maybe it's now 8 wastes of lean or 7 wastes that when we look at the production and logistics, where do we find in our processes, where are the wastes? And we want to eliminate the wastes and all of these things. 10, 15 years ago, a big thing was to bring the lean thinking into the startup world. And this is still, I think, a really good book to check out and think, because this is putting things into contemporary business context. The build, measure, learn cycle, if you have ever heard about this, this is, of course, where this comes from, this book. That you build things, you measure how they impact, you learn from the measurements, you build into things again. Good old design thinking is very much about the double diamond thinking that, okay, we have our process is such that we kind of open things to thinking, but we realize we need to converge and deliver. And then we open up things again for, sucking information, and then we converge. Sorry for running through this really fast. But I think actually many of you are more or less familiar with these, because the actual point I want to make here is that if these are the medications that have been successful for 10 to 15 years for bringing us agnostic tools and routines and thinking into our work. So what kind of they look like? If the lean mindset is about, these things, decentralized decisions, this is from, you can see the reference here in the middle. Design thinking is very much about exploration and being empathetic to the end users and customers. It's very about innovation. Agile mindset that comes from software engineering is very actually product oriented. It's all about building autonomous teams, evolutionary design in products, and so forth. And when you blend these things together, this is again from the Schneider book, which I actually recommend. You can find the book free online. It's kind of like, okay, what does it mean if we blend all these things together? What if I kind of take all of these things together? It kind of nicely puts that. Lean is about the organization, and agile is about solution delivery. Design is really about the vision. And when they overlap, you get kind of strategy, you get the evolutionary design over here, and here you kind of get the learning and doing cycle that they have these overlaps. But one of the points is that these schools of thought, if you will, that have been very popular, they have their own histories and they have their own strengths, which this picture I think shows really nicely. Lean is actually about the organization quite a lot. And Agile is actually about solution delivery quite a lot. It doesn't really think about the larger organizations, very team focused, for example. So if we would take all these medicine at the same time, just like that previous picture, so what Johnny Schneider in that picture is pretty much saying, like, this is the same thing in words, that, if you take all of these things, it really helps you better vision making, better strategy, better solution delivery. And in an organization transformation, if you will, it becomes learning is doing, aligning people to a purpose and value-based portfolio thinking. And these are great principles. I mean, these are really good things. These are things that you should probably take. Evolutionary design, focusing on the customer, acting to learning, constant learning. But before the break, I still want to leave you with this one thought, that what if we take one step further? If these are the medication that really seem to work, lean agile, lean startup, design thinking, what's actually the root cause for the organizational headache? So it's, if every Monday you come to work and you got this huge headache after the weekend and you take, medicine and the headache goes away, that actually is solving the problem. But maybe at some point you should start thinking that, is there something that happens during the weekend that is causing you headaches on Monday? So what are the things that are causing headaches in organizations? Because it seems like they're popping these pills of lean and lean startup and design thinking all the time. So another way of saying, if these are the medicine, what's the illness that they're curing? What's behind the principles, tools, and all of these? What are the questions they are answering? And before the last thing before the break, I'm going to give this point that if you put these all things together, all of these medicine, they are answering two questions. What is valuable work? What is valued in general? I'm going to go a little bit further with them. But also they have a lot of things, these tools and philosophies about working in a team, working in uncertainty, communication, and how not to falling in love with your own ideas. But they are all really focused on this. What is valuable work? And I'm saying that we can probably, those of you who have been in work life for a long time, have heard these phrases quite often. Blah, 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 value driven, blah, blah, blah. Let's reduce waste and focus on value. Blah, 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 valuable to our customers, blah, 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 create value, blah, 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 not money or profits, but value. Let's deliver value. So the value has become kind of like this placeholder for what an organization should be trying to do or create or achieve. So what is then valuable work? How do people working in an organization know what is valuable work? Well, the CEO just tells us what's value and we're done. Maybe. But let's look at these two questions a little bit. So what do I mean by this question? I mean simple questions like this. And I'm sure all of us have been in a situation where we have asked this. Why are we doing this? Is this valuable work? Are we wasting our time here? Is this really valuable work? I think this is important. Do others think that this is important? Is this what is expected of me at this workplace? Which task is more important than others? So that's in all simplicity what I mean is the question, what is valuable work? When I come to Monday to work without headache, what my work, when I start those routines and everything, what is valuable and what isn't? But it's a different question from this one. Because I mean by this question is what is valued in general. For example, oh my God, can I say that to the boss? Is that valued in general? Do they appreciate ambition here? Or looks like no one is rewarded for initiative, so that's not really valued in general here. Can I be critical? Can I dress like this? What if I fail? Is failure valued in general? Can he make a joke like that? So some might say that these are kind of maybe the cultural things, kind of in an old way of thinking and talking. That what's the company culture? What is valued in general? And I think that's good. But just to hammer this point in, what's the difference between valued in general and valuable work? Let's take two examples. So let's say that working late is valued in general at our workplace. it really doesn't give you a point whether the work is valuable or not. You could be working really late and long hours, but it doesn't tell you whether that work is valuable or not. Another example, let's say that our organization really values being proactive and future-oriented. But again, that's valued in general. That's not actually telling whether somebody's work is valuable or not. Maybe they work for a oil tanker business and they're really future-oriented about ice cream production. Well, they are future-oriented, but it's not really valuable work for the organization. So can you spot the difference between valuable work and valued in general? So maybe another way to look at it and think and maybe being actionable about this. We all talk about values at the workplace, and values are important. But as a leader or as a facilitator, you probably want to surface some of these values. So I'm saying maybe this sheds another way of looking at this, what I'm talking about. As a person, don't go and ask your colleagues or the people working for you, what are our values? So what are the company values? What are our team values? That's not a very actionable question, because you will get official school book answers, or you will just go down a rabbit hole of philosophy. What is value at work? What is ethics? What is morally right? Important questions, not typically very actionable. What if you go and ask the question, well, what do you think was considered valuable at work? What do you guys think is considered valuable in our team? And you will actually get different kind of answers. You will start getting glimpses of how people prioritize their own work, their own behavior and their actions. What is valuable? What is considered valuable at our company, for example? It's very different answers from what are the company values. And that's how we're getting into the work culture. And that's how we're getting into the core of all of these methods. That do people really understand what is valuable work? And you might be at this stage wondering, why is Risto ranting so much about this value thing? Because I think it all boils down to how people know what is valuable work and valued in general. And this is super important in the kind of organizations and cultures we're having and we're trying to build, because the more and more there is a desire to have autonomous, self-leading, meaningful work, strategic thinking collectively. That these are the dream organizations of 2020s, autonomous, meaningful, strategic, self-leading. And none of those fancy words work unless people can answer those two fundamental questions more or less the same way. What is valuable work and how is it valued in general? And the better people can answer those questions from their own perspective, the more resilient you are, the more autonomous you are, the more self-leading you are, and collective as well, if those things are aligned. So that's why I'm saying, in summary, looking at the contemporary remedies for change, lean organizations, design culture, lean startup thinking, it looks like the headache that these medicines are ascribed is that people need to know what to prioritize. People need help understanding what is valuable work so they can prioritize. And see how it resonates with this new culture thinking, the John Shook model and the thing that we talked about last time. Because if you're giving people the power to do what they see best, you might be influencing how they do things. Then people need to know what they are doing. And maybe in the John Shook model, if it was talking about car manufacturing, I think the people at the factory floor of Toyotas and other factories, they probably knew what they are doing. But I'm not sure if the knowledge worker in the 2020s has such a clear vision of what should I be doing. Knowledge work in the 2020s is radically different from, overalls, blue-collar work at a factory floor. I'm not saying they're better or worse, but it's very different. And that's why I'm saying this whole question of what should I do with my skills becomes so very critical. If we want to build these cultures with autonomy, self-leadership, meaningful work, and strategic thinking, People need to know what to prioritize. They need to know what to do and why they are doing these things. And that's pretty much what we're going to do after the break. And I'm going to tell you there are no ready answers. They're just shared meanings. 5-minute break. I hope that wasn't too fast. But now we can have a breather. See you in 5 minutes. Wasn't. I just wanted to tell you all this. Let's continue because I left you 5 minutes ago. Oh, thanks. Thanks, Inga. Thanks, Alexi, for the comments. I left you with this alignment of value. So how on earth will you know whether everybody has more or less the same meaning of what is valued at work and what is valued in general? In other words, how to get people to work towards the same values. Whether, I'm not saying what the values should be, that's for you to decide, but you probably, whether you're a facilitator or leader, should kind of align people more or less to go the same direction and towards the same values. Answer, spoiler alert, having shared same meanings. And traditionally, the most powerful tool to have people share meanings are numbers. Numbers are great, so this should be in your toolbox. Numbers are unambiguous. If I say you 5, you know it's 5. It's not 4, it's not 6, it's 5. Clearly understood. Easy to communicate, I just did. Easy to focus on the same target. Okay, everybody, last month we were 62. Next month it has to be 75. And even if you're 10,000 people, everybody understands that we need to increase from 62 to 75. So I got everybody focused on one thing, and that is the number. And as a side note, that's pretty much why our world seems to be running by numbers, because numbers are actually super powerful, for collectively focusing on the same thing. However, you probably shouldn't quantify everything into a number. You can quantify, but you probably shouldn't quantify. And it looks like our contemporary organizations, whether they're businesses or public sector or whatever organizations, they're having these things they consider valuable, such as creativeness, innovativeness, customer centricity, sustainable development, commitment from people. So how do you build shared meanings in that case? Think about your current employer. They probably have some very important strategic keywords that are not quantified. Maybe it is sustainable development. Maybe it is customer centricity. Maybe it is, innovativeness. So how do you make sure that everybody working in that organization understands it more or less the same way? Because as we said previously, that's the power for autonomous cultures and self-leadership, that you understand, people understand more or less the same way, the same things. Because the fact is that you just can't take the meanings as such. You cannot go to the grocery store and buy empathy and then just plug it into your company IT system and now everybody's empathetic. It doesn't work like that. Somebody probably has to facilitate the meanings for starting yourself and then others. What does this mean for us? So let's say that we really value trustworthiness in our organization. What does it really mean? What does trustworthiness really mean to me? And then you maybe go on, hey, people, what do you think this means? What it should be? What do you think it means? What do you think it means? And so forth and so on. So here's something I've been using for a long time because I think this is so very powerful in this context. And I really love this, again, framework I'm going to give you because it is very simple and it's based on actual research and science. So this is from Etienne Wenger, who's a relatively well-known French social scientist, and his book, especially his book about communities of practice, where he actually, just as an anecdote, he went to an American insurance company's call center. And there was 100 people in a huge open space office. And he was studying how do people create shared meanings. And he pretty much came up with this diagram. I have actually changed that. In the middle in his diagram, it says negotiation. He talks about negotiating meaning. I changed it to facilitation, but still the same point. What he's saying that we as human beings, that when we start try to get shared meanings on whatever concepts, on whatever thoughts and thinking and words. There are these two parts that should be in balance: reification and participation. So what do they mean? This is very familiar. This is participation. This, I'm sure we have all been in this situation, that we get the people together and we kind of open up the discussion, the dialogue, saying that, okay, we're trying to find a shared meaning, that what's our main customer group? And we're having a discussion again. What do you think? What do you think? And then people can be action, there's connections, people with different perspectives. Wow, okay, yeah, that's a really good point. And, you probably put Post-its on a wall, just like in this picture. And this is pretty much the workshopping part, the dialogue part, the stuff we all know, and probably a lot of us actually appreciate and find valuable. Actually, then this other part that has a fancy word called reification comes from Latin res, which means a thing or object. So reification literally means putting abstract things into something concrete. If there are any Marxists in the audience, then Mr. Marx had a different meaning about reification. Not that thought, but a little bit different connotations, if you will. But this is what we mean by reification here. So in an office setting that we are probably working in, reification means documents, plans, maybe it's a customer journey map, maybe it's a video we made about something, maybe it's a press release, maybe it's a contract. So again, putting abstract things into concrete. I think contracts are a perfect example. They're maybe having negotiations with a subcontractor, or maybe it's your customer, and you kind of have the participation, the discussion, and they go like, okay, now we need to put this into paper. That's reification. Great. So we all kind of understand these two things. And what Wenger is saying, that they should be in balance, that they come as a pair. And there's that yin and yang kind of arrows going on. They're saying that, we might have the participation. Let's say it is the negotiations with our clients. We're having this talk, and maybe there's Post-its and there's this conversation in a meeting room. And then we reify it into a draft contract. And once we have made that reification, we send it to the client reads it, and maybe starts another participation saying that, hey, this is good, but we want to change this. And then we're another discussion, dialogue. And then you make the changes to the contract, another reification. And now you kind of get the point why this is an ongoing thing. And maybe at some stage, we kind of stop the third thing and say, okay, this is good enough to go. We have a shared meaning about this relationship between our two companies. And the reification is this contract. That's what it means by coming as a pair. And we also actually very intuitively know that if this is not in balance, so let's say that there's too much participation and not enough reification, it means that there's no coordination, there's no documents, it's really difficult to scale things up, there's no anchoring, and we're just discussing and discussing and discussing these things. Nothing happens, nobody's kind of anchoring these things. And, this is a typical example of workshops without documentation. Maybe you have been in a scenario going like, wow, this is a really good workshop, but didn't we have this workshop like just 6 months ago? Yeah, we did, because nobody actually documented what we did the last time. And then I guess we're all familiar with this imbalance as well. So if there's too much reification, that there's no dialogue, there's no discussion, there's no participation, well, it's really difficult for people to commit to things. There's no ownership. There's probably no diversity included if it's kind of top-down orders. Because that's what it is really, isn't it, typically? That you get actions and orders from the top down, and if there's no dialogue, no communication, no participation, then we get all those problems I have listed here. And that's why they need to be in balance. And now you can see where the facilitation comes in. But also, hopefully, you can see this facilitation is not just about running workshops, if you will. It's actually having the other part as well, the reification part, putting things together, clarifying, simplifying, writing them down, and then maybe giving them to a new cycle of participation. So, of course, what this means is that as change agents or facilitators or leaders, we need people who are kind of like a librarian who's curating all of these different reifications. We need somebody to understand that what did this team talk about? What do they talk about? What do our customers think about this? And maybe just mentally think that you have all the workshop documents in your little library. But then, of course, we need also people who can do the participation part. The ones who can engage people in conversations, the ones who are really good at listening. Maybe they draw with simple tools and get people to talk and focus those conversations. So definitely, if you want to change things, you probably need them both. Or I'm saying if you want to lead other people, you need them both. Or just you need somebody to do this. You need somebody to make sure that this is in balance if you want those shared meanings. If you don't, if you want that our 1,000-person company has 1,000 different meanings for a customer, that's what you want, go for it. But if you don't, then somebody needs to take care of these two things. And the example I give you here, I was in January working with Volvo Group, which is the multinational company that does everything Volvo except the cars. So the trucks and the engines and the mining equipment and all of that. And they're really good at this. They are a multinational company, so they have different cultures all around the planet. And like you said, this is their slide. I got a permission to copy and show it in my teachings. And this is their slide about leader capabilities and expectations. And one of the three ones is clarify and align. And I think there's more into this, but just to give you an example, like really they are that to become a good leader in their organization. The leadership's jobs is to clarify things, make those simplifications, and then align people. And having these, how do you align people? How do you do that in a multinational company with such a diversity in it? So just to give you an example that this is actually a lot about, this is in that, this is the current leadership discussions in large companies. Good. I'm pretty much done, and I am Annika. I'm just giving you a few minutes to get ready. But Jari, anything to comment this far? So far?
Well, I would like to highlight this meaning making in general, because this is really a core of a collective effort. And when you had this autonomous teams or self-directed, self-managed, low hierarchy stuff, and when we are in dynamic world, so that should be a kind of continuous stuff that we not just have one discussion, but ongoing discussions about this collective meaning making, and really what we are doing, why are we doing, how do we know that we succeeded, and so this very core stuff. And this is also now connected to leadership, kind of leadership research, in the sense that goals, knowing the goals, is one of the core thing in leadership, also based on research. And it's easy to just take it for granted. Everybody knows what's expected, or they know their goals, but that's not true. And so really supporting this, this thing, and very basic stuff. So goals, meaning making, prioritizing, and keeping it alive all the time.
Yeah, keeping it alive. That's a very good addition, because things change, the world changes.
Yeah.
We're running into the fog, so it's kind of like, how do you have these mechanisms that you keep it live and meaningful, and the dialogue going on in many different ways. So just before putting you into breakout rooms, just to summarize after the break, the point that we can take principles, we can take tools, maybe they're design tools, lean startup tools, concepts and ideas, the stuff that we are giving in this lecture, from the outside world. And but just the fact that, go ahead.
No, so just coming back to this language we are using, the words we are using, they are so abstract, so that it's not at all clear what are we meaning with them. And people are, if we go back to these different lenses that we interpret differently, and so ensuring that we have shared meanings in those situations where we have to have those, and ensuring that. So that's really a core question, not just in change, but in teamwork and whatever we're doing together. That's one of the core things.
Absolutely. So kind of saying that they can't be meanings as such, but somebody, and probably if you're the responsible for the change, you're the one who needs to negotiate the meanings, facilitate them.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. You kind of then going with the Wenger model, you need the kind of the curation part, and then you need the kind of the participation.
Yes. And one more thing also about meanings, they are always local. That we use words which are generic, but the meanings are local.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of pretty much the whole thing, that we cannot take them, we can take the global meanings and we can even generate the global meanings for an organization, that this is our main customer group, but we also need to leave room for the local interpretations. And actually, I might be coming back to this later, but kind of whole point that if you're a large organization, you probably have like, yes, this is from the perspective of the whole organization, these are important customers. And that would be like a global meaning. But then you have like the local, let's say that we have this function and this business unit. They have their own local interpretation, which might be different from the different units. And you need to be able to, this goes into the big discussion that we don't have to have like one culture, one dogmatic, homogenic culture in a company that we need to balance between the global and the local and have actually micro cultures. But before we go to that, let's have like 12-minute breakout rooms. This time we're going to do it so that it's going to be a 2-minute silence, just to let you prepare of everything I have talked today, and adding comments from Jari, kind of try and your answers to the question that, hey, what's difficult about these? I'm going to give the questions soon, but I'm just going to now tell you how it goes. So after I have given you the questions, we're going to clock 2 minutes of silence, so everybody can kind of think for themselves and kind of prepare. And then we're going to put into the breakout rooms for 10 minutes. And then you share your thoughts there, okay? And give everybody time to talk. Mainly listening is okay. Just don't be totally quiet. But you don't have to be the most active person if you don't feel like it. And appreciate that there's a lot of different people there. Good. Here's the task: 2 minutes in silence, and then 10 minutes in the rooms. So think about a familiar context to you from work life. Maybe it's from your hobbies, some context where you have been part of an organization. And you're trying to get a teamwork. You're trying to get teamwork done. Maybe it's how do you create a successful workshop or managing a product or a business. And in that context, what meanings you probably have to negotiate? What are the key terms? What are the key concepts you think that everybody should understand more or less the same way? So 2 minutes, think about, it can be a past thing, it can be a present thing, it can be a future thing, some kind of organizational or team context. And what do you think and why are the key terms or meanings that team should probably agree about? Good. Now I'm going to start the 2-minute silence while Annika, owner. Yeah. Let's see what Alex's ChatGPT said. Thanks for the transparency, Alex. Communication, purpose and impact. Yeah. Ooh, I like, Christina, your example, or the one you wrote down about children's sports teams. I think those are kind of iconic, where the tensions of shared meanings surface themselves. So happy that you included that.
And maybe it's even how to create meanings. Is it really dialogue or something else?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the school life for kids and parents at the moment, at least here in Finland, is a lot of discussion of, the parents are putting a lot of pressure on the teachers to deliver. So a lot of meaning negotiation maybe there. Let's see what else we got. Short but insightful chat on how mutual understanding of simple elements can make a difference. Yes, I think we in this course believe in that. Yeah, and I think reading these comments is also, maybe if you are in a leadership position, it is kind of, actually, I'm looking at Aku, your comment here, is that how do you make those opportunities for people to ask or tell that they don't know? How do you make it psychologically safe? How do you make it kind of easy for people to show, if I put it bluntly, show their ignorance, or, how do you build a psychology so that it's not ignorance, it's actually making things better if you raise your hand and go like, hey, I don't understand, or, sorry, I didn't get it. Yeah, psychological safety becomes a key thing here as well. The concept of quality is interpreted differently by each stakeholder. Yeah, I think quality is always a good word. What does it mean? And if you want to have fun at work, just go and have a discussion what quality means to different people. And there's a huge diversity, I'm sure. Because of course it's contextual again. So again, and maybe this comes back to Jari's lecture in the first lecture, Jari's part in the first lecture about the different lenses and everything. That everything is so contextual. And sometimes I get this kind of feeling at different workplaces that we still think that there's one correct answer. It's somehow built in our, I don't know, education or the way we think about work life is that there's one correct answer. And that then we can get into these conversations that are not very fruitful if people are kind of like, no, I'm right. No, I'm right. And they're not open for the reality that there are actually many right answers because the thing is just so rich and complex. Yeah.
And that's I think the Wenger's term of negotiating is it's very good here, because we should take that seriously, that we have to agree on or negotiate at least how we understand this time in this situation, this team now, the core words, and not taking for granted because I understand that this way now, that's the only way to interpret and understand. So that's kind of continuous negotiating the meanings.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I know that it would be nice if some occasions.
And I like the kind of my example about contracts, because everybody knows that contracts are negotiated. So it's actually something we can all understand, that there's a process of negotiation, that there is not a truth, so to speak, quote unquote, truth that we need to search for. No, it's not. It's the negotiation of that we share the meanings. Yeah. So thanks for all those answers, and we're going to save them, save the chat. Here's something I did many years ago. It was just right before the COVID, was here in Finland. We got together Finnish, decision makers, leaders from different Finnish companies, but also, academics, academics about the work life, and made this little booklet. And one of the things that came out in the process of making the booklet was that what did these, corporate leaders and experts on contemporary work life thought? What are the meanings that leaders, facilitators most probably have to curate? And this is, what is it now? 5 years, 6, this is like 6 years ago. And I think this is still valid points. It's kind of like, this is what they said. That, if you go and talk on a rant about change, probably is a word that you should negotiate, that everybody understands more or less the same way. What do you mean by change? Kind of obvious. Then another big one is, what is considered work? What is work? Does everybody understand it the same way? And once you think about it, no. That's actually a can of worms, if you will. Who's responsible for lifelong learning? So in this world that keeps on changing so rapidly, who is responsible for the individual's learning, for example? Is it the individual? Is it the employer? Is it the society, whatever that means? Whose responsibility is this? They said it's probably something that needs to be negotiated and everybody understands, or maybe agrees to disagree. Then already there was what is value, what is valued. That probably comes from there as well. What are the meta skills required? So what are we're going to come back to this later in this course. What are the skills that are like traditional core technical skills, or traditional professions like business analyst or something? What are the skills needed in this uncertain world that are perhaps undervalued or invisible typically in a workplace? And then the last one, I still think it's very interesting. What are the desired silos that we want to keep? What are the borders that we see are important? So boundaries. What boundaries at the workplace we want? And I think by now, because after the COVID, we have all gone through this remote work experience. And we kind of understand that there probably should be some boundaries. For example, that how much remote work, how much we want to be face-to-face, or if we're working totally remotely, it's a different kind of experience. Going back to back from meetings is actually much more exhausting than in a face-to-face. So kind of what kind of boundaries we want at the work. So just as an example, what kind of things they already back then talked about, and I think they are still relevant. Well, then kind of maybe, remember I ranted a little bit about design, agile, lean, and lean startup, but I actually never gave you an answer which one to choose. Where should you start? That was a question I posed and I never answered. Well, I'm a slick academic, so I'm really good at avoiding clear answers. But let's see, I give you again indirect, unclear answer, and here we go. Because now you know about this reification of participation, so that's of course the answer. You don't take my meanings as such. You need to negotiate for your own context and people. So that's why I don't give you clear answers. So for example, like in this example, let's take and start using I think that will be, that's the lean canvas. So let's start using this tool that I have in this picture. And then you participate with people and, let's say, what's good about this tool? And then you get, does this work? Let's, start with design approach to do this. And then, of course, you make it your own version after feedback, and then you use it again, and you're blah, blah, blah. But kind of now that you have this circle of participation and reification, of course, the answer is that, in a way, start with the most promising one. If your company culture or if your team is more familiar with design thinking, start with the design thinking, but immediately start the process of making it your own, the whole reification participation process. If people are more familiar with lean thinking, start with that and then start making it your own all the time and introduce new things. So the answer is, of course, you need to start curating and facilitating. Start with the best guess and then grow it from there. That is the answer.
And maybe if I add one thing is that I think it's a combination that is richer, but starting somewhere, but not accepting that, okay, we have just one tool and it's enough, because it's just as it was your picture that they approached this from a little bit different view angles, but they also complete each other pretty well. And so understanding what's the right combination in the end.
Absolutely.
Or actually a serving combination.
And continuing from your point, Jari, is that then, of course, it also means that everybody needs to understand that there is not a right answer. It's not like an exercise that somewhere on this planet exists the principles for our team and we need to find them. No, it's a it's a process of construction. It's a process of negotiating that we can build this. We can make the local version ourselves. And it might sound kind of silly or naive, but no, in my experience, we're still somehow in organizational context, we are still think that there is somewhere an answer. That's why we have these things. It's design. Design is not for us. We're not a design organization. And then people just push away all of these useful tools and thoughts and processes because they get allergy from the word design. And that's, of course, silly. Because, of course, at the end, both, whether it's design or lean startup or whatever, it's all about that we start with something and then we make it our own. We construct the principles, we construct the values as a negotiation process. And that's, that's kind of that can be a very radical thought in some contexts. Another way of looking at the Wenger diagram is that the reification is this is kind of the tools. These are the objects. This is the way we organize ourselves. This is the more concrete stuff. This is the stuff without humans, if I put it bluntly and cut it corners. And then we have the human part, which is the people's thinking, behavior, and understanding, which is very much participation. So which do I choose? Okay, let's put it into exercise number 2 and see if we can come up with an answer. So let's say here is your change program, your project for changing your team. And you're wondering which one to choose. And then you would, of course, do it something like this. You would go like, what's the desired impact? Once we have had this change project, what will happen 6 months after that? What is the desired impact at 6 months once the project has finished? What has happened 1 year after the change program has been successful? And then just like the golf player, you go one by one back. Now, what about 6 months? What about 1 month? So what do we need to have here to reach the impact after 1 month? So once you have introduced this new thinking or new methods or new tools, and once that project kind of stops, what happens? And then, of course, going back to the history, where do you come from? What are people, like I said, what are people familiar with? What are their backgrounds? What have they been using? Listening to them, understanding them. Who needs to be involved? So, then before the project is then you can start answering the question of, okay, based on all of this context about where do we want to go, maybe that will give you some guidelines, which school of thought you want to start with. Kind of simple as that. Talking about simplicity, exercise number 3, here it comes officially and formally. Like I said, I introduced it already. Deadline by the end of 26. So deadline by the end of next Monday. And just a note for you, because we're going to have a next lecture on Wednesday, we're going to make it slightly more simple by having that you're going to have the same pairs for these 2 exercises because they're now coming so close to each other. And you're going to have the same deadline as well. So next Monday, end of the day, is the deadline for this exercise and the exercise you're going to get on Wednesday. Good. And you're going to have the same pairs. So once you get together, you can do these 2 exercises at the same sitting. Got it? Of course you did. So here's the official slide. Facilitate the success criteria of your pair's work. So the pair, why did I click that? So what is their current project? You can still use the same project you've been using before. It doesn't really matter for the sake of the exercise. And now start asking for the desired impact. 6 months from now, okay, if that's the desired impact in 6 months, what needs to happen in 3 months? If that's what needs to happen in 3 months, what needs to happen in 1 month? And so forth and so forth. So facilitate the dumb success criteria. Help your pair to come up with success criteria that are doable, understandable, measurable, and beneficial. And remember, just from previous experience, just to remind you, beneficial means that this goal helps to achieve the desired impact. That's what we mean by beneficial. And measurable doesn't have to be a number. For the sake of the conversation, try to find a number. But if it's really something that quantifying doesn't fit in, then go for qualitative measurements. Go for something else, but somehow try to make it as measurable as possible. And then just like before, you switch roles and then you help the other person do their project goals or success criteria. Remember to reflect. Now we only had 3 people who had forgotten to do the reflections, which was a huge increase from last week. So let's see if we can get to everybody remembering to do the reflections. Because by now, you should probably understand the reflections are the thing in this class. We are very on the meta level here. Good. There you go. So return the criteria and the reflection, pretty much the same procedure as 2 previous exercises. Any questions? Rachel was looking for tourists in the American time zones. Nice initiative, Rachel. So answer Rachel, there is her, your email is over there if you want to do. And otherwise, you can contact us. And if you want any of your tourists really want to do this exercise, then let's see if we can help you. But that was very nicely done. I'm pretty much done with lecture 3 out of 6. and Jari, you will go into facilitation on Wednesday. Don't leave yet. Just as usual, here are the key takeaways put in text, just to remind you, or whatever you do with the slides and everything, but trying my best to put them into textual form. Further readings about today. Oops, I'm wondering if these are actually the same as last week. There's yeah, I will check them before we submit the new goals. Here's your checklist. Attendance form, I am sure that, yeah, Annika put it just like 10 minutes ago, no, 6 minutes ago. And then you will get the pairs probably tomorrow. I hope I'm not promising too much, Annika, at the moment. And like I said in the very beginning, if you leave the course, please let us know, so you don't get, paired up with somebody who's waiting for a pair and you have left the course. It's perfectly fine to leave the course, no hard feelings. But if you don't tell us, then hard feelings. See you the day after tomorrow. That would be May 21st if I'm using my calculator right. So that would be this coming
it's
Wednesday.
pretty soon. And next we will take a deeper dive to this kind of processual nature of facilitation, not just single event, but how we build a relationship and how we keep up the process as such. But building on that, what we have been going through so far.